All right, time to sit here awkwardly as all my streaming services tell me I'm live. Oh, hey, hi, hey, hi, hey, hi. Welcome, creatives, community, and kind folks to the channel RPG with DBJ. I am your host, and it is you guys who make this channel what it is today. It makes it great. This week we are talking about game design, and today being Trope Tuesday, I think there's plenty of tropes we can call upon to add to our discussion. Yesterday was quite a bit of a grab bag, and we got a little bit distracted and whatnot. We always get a little squirrely on the channel. Going to need to make some squirrel merchandise, I think. but anyway, guys, I think let's start out with some trope. Oh, I forgot to tell you, the last 5 to 10 minutes of the show will be a little bit of a self promotion. I am in the throes of settling out the parameters of a new role playing game that I'm working on, known as Retcon. It is a someone really enjoyed the term tachyonic espionage, and essentially that's what the game is about. And since we're talking about game design in general, I thought I would openly start to design the parameters of this game, including the world and the rules and yada yada yada. So today on Trope Tuesday, I thought we would talk about the the idea that tropes can in game design can be a good thing because we have a common place to start from, as well as the fact that sometimes tropish things to do in our games are actually pretty good as well. And lastly, I will say that what we expect to happen in our game if we are designing a game, even if we're doing it from ground up or we're just modifying rules and whatnot, is to ensure that we have mechanisms in place to reward the behavior that we want to see. So less stick, more carrot, essentially. And so let's start out with some tropes and try not to get ourselves pigeonholed and figure out what those tropes mean. So, an example. Uh, we've been going through something called a cutting class series on this channel where we take a whole week and we talk about classic Dungeons and Dragons classes and we rip them apart and we build worlds around them and that kind of thing. And I want to bring up the difference between paladin and fighter, right? So a fighter is a trope. It's this person who, classically is good at weapons, and they are frontline soldiers, and they what is it? They tend to be the bricks. They tend to be the tanks up front when using some video game parlance, and they can dish out a lot of damage and take a lot of damage using weapons in their hands. And we understand that. And the reason we have tropes are good is because it's very shorthand, easy shorthand to describe what you have in your world. So an example would be you're trying to create this non Eurocentric world of maybe prehistoric survival or something, but you want to come up with a descriptor that describes someone that's like a fighter, but you're like, well, in this world, there really are no organized fighters. I need to find something. So you may need to find like other words or nomenclature or whatever to describe the thing you're talking about. Okay, well, if you're going prehistoric tribal, how do you describe someone who is a good hunter versus a scout versus a tracker versus a trap setter, versus maybe an oracle or a healer or something like that, right? You're going to have to come up with some kind of words and such, and that's where thesaurus I think really helps because, like I mentioned about the word paladin, you if you use paladin or elf or assassin or something like that, and you have to spend too much time unraveling that, well, it's like this, but it really isn't like this because it's more like this other thing. It could be a little bit. disheartening when the people you're trying to introduce to your new game don't really understand what you're talking about, right? It's the in my world, elves aren't really elves; they're more like dwarves, and it's like, well, why not just have dwarves? It's that kind of thing. So be careful, I think, in when designing a world and using game design, to be careful about not making it so alien that it's too hard for the players to get into it, because there's too many moving pieces to explain to get someone into the thing. Omen talks about the uh, Dwemer of Elder Scrolls. I don't have a reference to that because I don't know Elder Scrolls that well, but I'm sure everybody else gets it in terms of like what are you referring to? Now, mind you, one easy way of doing something like mixing a trope is to literally mix a trope, right? Like if there's a group in your world known as the dragon priests or something like that. I mean, okay, dragons. I'm like, get those priests. All right, then maybe you're like, well, the dragon priests have the ability to call upon the powers of dragons or something, or they could summon the shadow of a dragon and enhances their powers. Maybe I don't understand exactly what they are, but if you can use as few words and descriptors as possible to get me into your world, then all the better, right? Oh, oh, it says elves with steampunk technology who are called dwarves. Yeah, it's like yeah, yeah. Now, sometimes you could be a little tongue in cheek with something, like I don't know, a race called the Titans that are very small or something. I mean, that's not too bad if you are specifically going for tongue in cheek. But I would, if you're trying to design something or change something in your the expectations or something, it's far easier to start out with the trope and then change the trope later. Eberron did that. So, for example, in Eberron, you do have classic dwarves, but then you also have the urban city dwarves that are very good with money and finance, and they are mercantile agents or whatnot. And you go, that's a makes a lot of sense as an outgrowth of this other thing. It makes sense. Gnomes, I believe, in Eberron are urbanized. Like, some of them are thieves and deceptors and spies, and they also work quite a bit in the entertainment field and whatnot. And you can go, okay, I can see that. Halflings tend to have issues as well. So the other thing I would say, because we're talking about tropes and such, are it's a hard juggling act. For example, if you're using the fifth edition OGL, since we talk about Dungeons and Dragons quite a bit on the channel, are you including something because it fits into your world, or are you including it because you feel it will sell something? An example would be, in your new prehistoric world, do you really need to have the amalgam of halflings and gnomes and dwarves in your world? Or do you just need some form of small folk that are an amalgam of all three of those? I would bring up, there's a setting. I have the PDF, but the hardback is coming out, known as A Dead Man's Guide to Dragon Grin, and there is a race of people who are descended from. They were like the workhorses of a race that kept these titans alive, and the titans were like mechanical gods, essentially like mecha gods. And the titans fell, but the race still survived. And so instead of having both gnomes and halflings and goblins as an option, they are one race that has a little bit of aspects of all of them, of a few mixed spatterings of all of them. So they are good with like arcanotech, kind of Archintech, I believe it's called. Anyway, in Dragon Grin, and they have different. They are fast and quick, like halfling traits, and they also are good with technology, like a gnomish trait, and and such. And so it kind of combines that. Oh, they're a little bit. Sneaky, kind of like goblins, and so it kind of mixes those two, so you can also do that as well. Lastly, I would say that to scrub off it, don't be afraid to scrub off the serial numbers, like reskin, reflavor, reuse, repurpose things in the world to make it your own. An example would be that a common trait is elves have the in currently in fifth edition, elves are good with long and short bows and long and short swords. It's like, well, you don't need to keep it that way. You could change it to something else. Maybe in your world, spears or kopeshes or scimitars or tridents and nets are a thing in your world, and it won't break it. It won't break the game at all when you change skill bonuses and attribute bonuses and things of that nature. Even if you're starting from scratch, just having a few more choices for players just goes a long way. Owen says one problem with that is the complaint regarding Elder Scrolls like orcs, dwarves, and goblins are just a variant of elf. In that world, in the Elder Scrolls world, is it really a variant, or uh, are is that like a historical thing? Like they used to be elves, but there's something completely different. Not sure. Cameron's like monocultures. Ugh. Not only are they tropes, but they're boring. I'd rather see more cultures and less nations and species if need be to accommodate the increase in workload. Yep. As a matter of fact, actually, to expand on what just Cameron said, orcs are cursed elves. Same with goblins. Yeah, that is a bit of a trope. Um, it can it's the monoculture thing done for the bad guys, right? Dwarves are just technologically advanced elves. Oh, yeah. But remember, that's their own world. We don't have to copy somebody else's Elder Scrolls world and think that we're doing something different. But like Cameron mentioned about monocultures, like I'd rather see more cultures and less nations. One great way to shorthandedly combine the two is to go, okay, most of the people in this nation tend to have these traits. Like, let's say there's a desert nation, right? So in the desert nation, and like in our own world, we know that there are certain traits that correspond to where people live simply because of the nature of where they live. Jungle realms are different than desert, than different than mountains or plains or coastal. Islanders are coastal people, and that's not a stereotype. That's just a matter of living in those places. If you live in the Arctic region, guaranteed you're going to be wearing clothing to keep you warm, right? So that may be a commonality amongst all the people that live there, and then so that would I'm going to maybe nation isn't the right way. Region might be a better term for that, right? So all the people that live in the Arctic region tend to have these I don't know, 5 common traits, but most of them are they usually have 2 of the 5 common traits or something. And then when it comes to cultures, then you can also have different cultures. So, for example, you may have a handful of cultures. There are warrior cultures, there are nomadic cultures, maybe there are uh, technological cultures or industrial cultures, mercantile cultures or something. And so then you mix the two, like, oh, maybe these people are a mercantile styled culture or nomadic culture that lives in a desert. Oh, okay. And then you go, oh, well, they're a warrior culture that lives in the Arctic, that kind of thing. Cameron says, I've heard people argue that Tolkien did monocultures, but the elves were diverse in thinking, and we hardly witnessed any dwarves. Humans and even halflings were diverse by region. I think, I think the, I think the lack of diversity increased diversity when it comes to Tolkien came from the fact that he wrote from the point of view of his own culture. He admittedly said that this was a fantastical mirror image of what he saw as, like, you know, Great Britain and such. So from my point of view, it seems my upbringing, it seems very limited. Whereas if you are from that culture, it seems very broad. And so you got to, not only so you got to be careful, but it's like, it depends on your context, right? Like, I Tolkien didn't include very many people of color, and if he did, he wrote it from the standpoint of a culture at a time and place where, that part of the world thought of anybody that wasn't them as lesser than themselves, right? So yeah, so I think that's where that came from. Red Dice says he did do the cursed ruined elves as on orcs. Yeah, he did. Yep. Yep. And like, Omen says, and it was probably so big that he didn't have much time for anything else. Is one of the big issues with world building. Yeah, unfortunately, when it comes to like world building, and even though it's supposed to be Trope Tuesday, when it comes to world building, is that you could build a world so big that no one ever gets to really find out what's going on. It's the ring world problem. I don't. There's a science fiction story that's was written in the 70s. Larry Niven. Anyway, and you follow me on this. Ring world is the idea that you take a flat surface and, yep, Larry Niven, Ring World. Love that book. Series. And you wrap it around the sun at the orbit of where the Earth goes, and everyone lives on the inside. So if you look straight up, you would see the sun. And he described it and created and all this kind of business. The problem with the ring world, and I don't mean the technological problem with it, which it does have some technological problems because it would rip itself apart. But that being said, you could never, in the lifetime of humanity, ever completely explore a ring world. And the same in that is compounded a million times a million fold when it comes to the idea of a Dyson sphere, which really wouldn't exist. But even if you could create a fictional Dyson sphere, you would never be able to explore all of it. So if your world is so big that it can't be explored, then you kind of it's kind of like wasted energy. Like, oh, you guys never left the main continent. And they're like, left the main continent? There's like 80 different cultures and 65 different locations and 57 different places to explore. It's the ring. It's the Game of Thrones idea, right? Like, oh, there's Westeros and there's Essos, and you expect us to go, way up in the north and down in the south and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, difficult, very difficult. Oh man. Now, Red Dice. Yeah, like Red Dice Diary says, that's why I've only got a small hex map defined for my hex crawl old school essentials game. Yeah, there can be, now mind you, there's nothing wrong with being a world builder, but I feel like when it as a game design element, sometimes the world is built without much motivation for the players to go out into it, or for the world to impact the players if they stand still. So I've always brought up the fact that if your players don't move, your world should move the players. And whether that is them getting recruited, people wanting them to be recruited into a battle, or choosing which noble should take the throne, or the weather should start to change and freeze them in their place if they don't go to the local inn or set up a camp. Like, there should be motivating forces in the world that if you don't move, then you will be moved if you don't make a choice. And very often there are things, like, for example, today in politics, right? Lots of people have this stance like, well, if you're not for me, you're against me. And sometimes players can, especially if they're like fall into the orphan murder hobo. I have no connections. I don't belong to the world. I have no roots to be tied down or something. That they can very easily disappear into the world and not and kind of flounder around like a leaf in the wind without being embraced by the world for good or bad or all of the above, right? Omen says that's why I'm trying to build a huge sci-fi fantasy epic taking place across the universe, and people keep telling me to shrink it because it's just too big. Yeah, sometimes it can. If it's too big, it's too easy to run away. If there's an issue or PCs get bored or there's something the player characters understand that they know that they're over their head, and instead of buckling down because you're like, yeah, I want these to be the intrepid heroes that are in over their heads, but they still fight through it. And instead, your players are like, yeah, we're in over our heads. Let's go. You're like, what? Um, Marquise Hardis, who helped develop his setting known as Scavenger, put in like a meta, it instilled in it a meta through line, and sometimes a meta through line. Like there you go. Like Omen says, yep, they need a strong motivation. Sometimes designing a world that has a motivation built into it is a great idea. Like for example, the Age of Piracy is a meta through line, right? So if you say there's tons of islands, a huge archipelago, and it's the age of piracy, and you're like, oh, so we sail on ships and we're pirates, right? It as opposed to the age of exploration or an age of dominance where you're part of a military, or an age of faith where you're part of churches, and faith and religion is very, very important. Um, you can put a through line into your world where people are motivated to become nomads or traders or dominators or freedom fighters or escapees, and place that in the world, and the player characters might be caught up in it. The age of it's the dawning of the age of Aquarius. Exactly. Oh man. Red Dice says, "I think you definitely need an initial hook or motivator, just something to get them out of the out of the door. If it's not like Bilbo, it's not like Bilbo if Gandalf didn't show up, right? Yeah, like it's like, hey, I'm not going anywhere. It's fifth meal, right? Why do I have to go out there? Having a even if the players don't choose the motivation, if the world itself is moving, the player characters could now they understand where they fit or maybe where they don't want to fit. Um, Rick says a word of caution: if you have movers that forces the players to move, make sure that the world still needs the PCs. A lot of times when you have factions set up, the worlds end up running itself. Yeah. Empty spaces. You guys know I have Future Friday to kind of dedicated to transhumanism, and the game Eclipse Phase has a huge balance of here's a bunch of paragraphs for world building, and guess what? We never finished the bottom of it. One trick that writers can use when designing a world is the having it written from the point of view of an unreliable narrator, and creating problems that haven't been solved because it needs the players, right? It's the we hear mysterious things on that mountain and no one's really been able to solve it, but storms keep pouring down to us, and we're just dealing with the idea of the frigid colds that pour down from the mountainside, right? So you're like, oh, whereas here's this thing that we have to watch out for, and oh, by the way, maybe we as players can solve the curse up in the mountains or something. Yeah. Switching out the halflings for the Ewoks. Yeah, the back pocket. Red Dice says, I try to go for a middle ground. I have a small area that is defined in more detail. The rest of the world is sketched out so it's consistent, but in nowhere as much detail. Bilbo, I daren't go there. I've seen adventurers eyeing me up and muttering the phrase "spare halfling." Like, what's the Star Wars equivalent of a spare halfling? Ewoks. Scarf Jawa? Anyway, the so it being Trope Tuesday, I also think that rewarding the thing that we want to see in the game is a very good idea. Um, in the sense of, we often hear back and forth, and this comes in waves, spikes and shallows in the RPG community, where someone will, of course, we talk about Dungeons and Dragons and other games, and they'll say, well, the combat section is like 60 pages. Why wouldn't we just make characters that are built around combat? Why the intrigue or social interaction or uh, buying and selling and trading of goods and services or building of temples or something? Like, why would we bother doing that? And the reason why you have those conflicts is, it's not because you can't engage in role playing in any game. Heck, you could just pick up a couple of dice without rules and start that way. Children have done that all the time, right? Let's play cops and robbers or hide and go seek or something without a book, and then you start setting the rules amongst the 8-year-olds or whatnot. But the thing is that, like one or more of the classic 8 types of fun, some people like rewards for doing a thing, right? Combat gives you a reward because I've picked certain traits for my character, and then my character gets to engage in combat, i.e., I should be doing combat. And some games don't encourage the, say, nomadic lifestyle you want to see people engaging in your world, or the in-depth social interactions that you want to have in your world, because it doesn't reward mechanically the actions you want to take. And so I would say, if you're starting to use rules, or you want to modify rules, or you're like, hey, I can very easily use the 5th edition OGL and use the SRD, but I want to modify it to have something in my game world or something, then I think just start to create some different rules so that it benefits that. Let's see. Red Dice Diary says, I agree. I give experience points in old school essentials when the PCs uncover a new, larger map hex, or they discover a landmark or a dungeon. I never understood the idea of why experience points only means killing things, or why it's stuck around. I remember very, very old school, BX style, that's what happened. But if you think about the description of the word experience, it means you've experienced something. So if you find trolls and you hide from the trolls who are looking for you and you don't fight them, I think that's experience, because you've experienced this part of the world. Also, rewarding, like you said, rewarding experience points for players that uncover like a new hex map or landmark or a dungeon, or like a monolith, or befriending a tribe of people that was before hidden, or uncovering a magical tree or whatever in your world. Experience points, or reward them for engaging in the world that you've wanted. Rickard says, I have seen sandbox games that are so much about these factions move in the world with or without PC involvement, turn into more of a world building exercise with PCs trying to play at the same time. Oof. Okay, I love you, Rickard, because you always come up with the opposing view, and yeah, we're going to get into that one. Yeah. Kaya says, are y'all anti-trope? I missed the beginning, so maybe that's discussed already. Yeah, anti-trope. No, we talked about, or at least I talked about tropes. I opened up with the idea that tropes are actually a good thing because it's shorthand. Rickard says, the world is there for its own sake, and the PCs are just as much along for the ride as they would be in a railroad game. Yeah, I think uh, um, I sometimes feel that with a very dense intellectual property. Rick says anti-trope, anti-Tuesday. Maybe it might be a thing. So an example would be the the player characters not being able to destroy the Death Star, right, in Star Wars or whatnot, or not being able to being so low on a totem pole in terms of factions that they have no impact in the world, and you really do have to be careful about what is it? Be careful of your darlings. There is a movie term where it says you should be kill your darlings, or in other words, the best building the best building tool for a writer or movie maker or something are an eraser, a pair of scissors, the delete button. In other words, better to have less detail and less impact by the factions in your world than more detail and more impact, right? So if, for example, if you have an assassin's guild in your world and it's nearly impossible for the PCs to join them, it's nearly impossible for the PCs to confront them or get rid of them. They're so much better than the player characters. They commit murders, assassinating people in and around the player characters. The player characters get blamed for the murders, and there's nothing the player characters can do. It'll eventually turn them off, right? So not only should you have toys in the sandbox for the players to play with, but be aware that they're going to break some things and allow space for the players to break things, because players may feel like, while there are some players that are just very destructive, they just like to go into worlds and see the place burned. Um, the By putting up too many walls or barriers to prevent that action means that the players who really want to engage in the world and be movers and shakers can't. So I definitely do agree that a world that keeps moving too much like a raging storm, and the players have no ability to act or react in the world, it can be pretty dangerous. But I feel like because today really, because we're supposed to be talking about tropes, and it does blend in with world building, because tropes are a good shorthand. The reason why tropes work is because when you disrupt the trope, now the players now have a mystery to uncover why it is the trope doesn't work anymore. So an assassin's guild that doesn't take advantage of killing someone because they have a code, maybe the players now have an opening to, say, get into the assassin's guild, right? Like the assassin's guild doesn't kill a certain bloodline or children or operate in a particular region. The PCs are like, that's different. I wonder why. And then that might be the opening. Like it's the yin and yanging of your world, where, hey, the knights in my world, pure white, have this issue with them, a little bit of darkness, or the evil culture in my world, has a little bit of light in them. They're very honorable, or they only fight during a certain season because they understand that they need to harvest or something. Like, you could do many things of that nature. Rickard says, if the Empire blows up Planet X with the Death Star because that is what they would do, I would argue you are going about it the wrong way. The question would be, what will enhance the PC's game? It can be difficult to figure that out, especially if you are, it's like the adventure paths or modules. We used to call them modules back in the day. Storyline, like, if you don't know who's going to engage in your world, it can be difficult to bend it or flex it, especially with game design. So sometimes a lot of that stuff can be very generalized because, no one knows in the next WotC adventure path that there's going to be 3 warlocks and 2 clerics adventuring in the world. Like, they don't know that. So a lot of times it's like, oh, well, the generalized adventurers are going to encounter these things in this world, as opposed to designing it specifically for what the players intend to do. Are they maybe they're a group of mercenaries, or they are a group of traveling merchants or something, and the two might be completely different. Red Dice Diary says, I use a simple faction system. Each has a goal. I give that goal a number. At the end of each session, I roll a die 6 at and add it to their progress when they hit the target number. They've done the thing. Yeah, yeah. Uh, I don't have a problem with the living world. Sometimes it could get a little bit too complicated. Oh, let's go to the north to stop the lich, and then, well, since you went to the north, you forgot about the dragon down south, and it's like, well, you might not want to pull on the strings too much, but the world should move, right? Whether it's like seasonal changes or governmental changes. Maybe there's a portion of your world where there's like a lot of turnover for politics or something, and that's basically like a bullet point, right? It's like, oh, by the way, the Council of Seven was assassinated, and now this new noble family took over, and the PCs are like, man, there's a lot going on down the south. Should we go there? That kind of thing. Caius of Galantry says the world is the GM's darling. If you believe in killing your darlings, the players should be able to destroy it, and if they are able to, eventually they will. Sounds cool to me. Yeah, that's more of a level of consequence rather than like invulnerability. Like Rickard is saying, well, if you can't change the world and the world keeps moving and the PCs don't have a place to fit in it, they're not going to. It's like, oh, it's a machine. I can't stop. I guess I'll just sit here and watch the gears move, right? As opposed to letting the players live in a world that is subject to their own consequences. And that's very difficult to design into a game because you don't know what the players may do. Although you could design like, hey, here is a part of the world that if like a bunch of if thens, like if this thing happens, then this thing will happen as well. Like a little predictors in the future, I suppose you could do that, or if the players get involved in something. So yeah, like Rickard says, should it move or should it move when needed? And it's the it's the when a tree falls in a forest, does it make a sound, right? Like adventure should be player facing. So sure, you may say, well, if they're not in the South, what's the point in even mentioning the South and what's going on in the South? But game masters are players too. So when the players are facing whatever they're facing, that should be the adventure. And later you could go, well, the politics are really disruptive down in the South, and I think I'm going to have danger grow in the South, much like the players gaining levels up north. They get the 5th level. Now's the time to start to throw out the hooks to get them to reel them back in to start going down to the South because they're ready to do the thing. So sure, you could say that maybe the world shouldn't keep on moving, especially behind the scenes where they can't see it. But if it doesn't have an impact on the players, I don't really have a problem with it. I would just say that, like, just be careful. Like, if the players make gains, try not to take those gains away from them too often because the world keeps moving. Yeah. Yeah, like Kaya says, responded like, "That's awesome, Rickard. I don't know how to reply from my handheld." Yeah. Yeah. Red Dice Diary says, "I think it's a balancing act. You want the world to move enough to create the illusion of a living, breathing world without leaving the PCs behind, but you don't want it to go into suspended animation when the PCs aren't present." Yeah. But Kaya says, "But isn't the coolest, most memorable end to a campaign the end of the world and everything in it?" I think somebody's showing their nihilistic side. here's my nihilistic side, and here's my nihilistic side. Which one should I do? Annihilation or annihilation? Cameron's like, yeah, Bob fell over a week ago and hasn't shut up since. Someone help me up. It's silly. Oh man. Some other tropish things when it comes to game design are old falling into the trap of old bones. We understand what like hit points are, armor class, initiative, movement rates, and things. And I would say, lastly, don't be afraid of changing it up a little bit. I really enjoyed like an initiative system that was in a game, Feng Shui, that I mentioned that I played quite a bit. And essentially, it was a countdown system. So you rolled. How do I explain this? You rolled 2d6 and added some numbers to it, and then every time you took an action, you subtracted 3 from it. So you started with the highest number, and then you started counting down. And if you wanted to move faster, you suffered a penalty based on how much faster you wanted to move. So if every action took 3 seconds and you wanted to move in 1 second, you had a -2 to act, to do a thing. And it was just a very simple countdown system. I also remember from, I think it was second edition or AD&D or whatever, that we used to roll initiative every round. And as opposed to letting, you know, there's an issue with, say, in Dungeons and Dragons with players going Nova. You can confront those things. You can get rid of armor class and make it damage potential. You could eliminate static AC, which is basically taking 10, and make it dynamic by having people roll for it and whatnot. Now, my problem, you want to confront the issues of like too many moving parts, die rolls, too many choices, maybe not enough choices, and balance your game design that way. But yeah, you can get rid of old bones very easily. And I would suggest doing so because you might have a great idea to do something. Uh, Rickard says, quote, "There's trouble down in the South." And 2 years later, it's still trouble because the PCs haven't gone there, and making it collapse wouldn't serve the current events the PCs are going through. Yeah, well, that's why you drop the hook, and if they don't take the hook, I would just forget about it, right? Like if let's say they are literally in the concordance of your world, they're in the middle, and you're like, I'm going to drop a hook for the north, south, east, and west. And then once they start moving in one direction, I wouldn't give too much thoughts about the other places. Maybe in the back of my mind as a world builder, I would. But if they're not there, I wouldn't harp on it because then all you're doing is distracting the PCs rather than letting them. Most player characters like to put themselves on a railroad, despite the fact that they don't say so. So yeah, they'll make their own hooks if you don't give them one. And whatever the PCs are facing, that's where the adventure should be, right? Which is the idea of the quantum ogre. You know, it's like I made an adventure where they confront ogres in a forest, and you're like, well, you might as well use that with the ogres in the desert because they're not going into the forest at all. Yeah, like Rickard goes on to say, why burn a plot the players can engage in for no payoff? You can have rumors change about who has the upper hand and in what way the trouble shifts, but still maintain the status quo. Yeah, oh, absolutely. Like, for example, maybe the status quo in a particular region of your world it's always changing, right? That's the if that makes sense, right? It's always changing because that's what happens in that part of the world. That might be the normal thing, whereas maybe in another part of the world, it's very static, like I don't know, the nobility, or there's a knighthood that protects this part of the world, and it's always been that way until the PCs get involved in it, right? There's no problem with that. Zax 200 says, illusion of choice. If they move east, but you really like the west hook, move that hook. Yeah, same thing with the same thing with giving out information to player characters. Like, be careful of, you have to go to the blacksmith to get the information about the key. It's like, be careful about attaching information to specific NPCs. Just have a list of information, your list of NPCs, and if they go into the tavern instead, or want to talk to, I don't know, an acolyte in the local church, or speak to the head of the mercantile guild or something, you're like, oh, finally, they talked to an NPC. Flip through my notes. Oh, here's the detail they should find, and attach them that way. I think that can. I think that's a good bit of advice. Like, the illusion of choice is a big one in a lot of role playing games that we don't talk about, but it's there. Red Dice Diary says, personally, I don't see it as burning the plot so much as developing it. Okay, so the trouble down south isn't the same 2 years later, but the fallout of those troubles or new situation can be interesting, especially if you want to have like player characters that have relatives that have gotten older, or that NPC at the tavern got married and had a child or something, or the local bridges into the town got washed away by a storm or something. And you could just write those notes down and go, okay, when they come back to town, here are some changes, and put those changes in. And I think I think the issue would be taking away too many gains from player characters. Like, oh, we release those people from bondage. Let's go into our next adventure. And you're like, it's like my world's supposed to have slavers down south, so I'm going to make sure it happens again. I think that's terrible to do. Sure, players could leave a situation and not be there to protect it, but I think taking away gains is too much of a problem. I would let certain things develop, like for example, stories get built and legends get built around player characters' actions would be pretty fun and a thing to do that something keeps building. Puppet. There's like puppet shows and songs written and plays are reenacted over the player characters' actions, and the players are like, is that supposed to be me? Because I never wore anything like that. I think that could be pretty fun to incorporate into a world. But since we're talking about game design, you could have a similar to what Red Dice Diaries was talking about, where each region might have a numerical change value, so that some regions might be in a lot of flux, others very little flux, and over time you might have there are a list of 10 things that would happen over a period of time, whether the players are there or not. And when the players are there, they disrupt what's going on. I don't know. I think it's just it's a balancing act, because you want to have the player characters have as much impact on the world. Even if they're the small people, you want them to impact things so that they feel like their actions, their words, their motivations are the things that are changing what's going on. Maybe the king or queen changes their outlook because of a meeting with the player characters, or a local evil banditry changes their minds about sacking all the trade routes because the PCs put a stop to it or something, and that becomes not a stable part, but a known factor in the world. So yeah. Rickard says, hot take, maybe? Even the most open world game is indistinguishable from a linear game when looking back at the game. You don't see the paths you didn't take, so maximize the paths the PCs are on. Oh, hell yeah. Hell yeah. Player characters love to railroad themselves. They do. It's like, sometimes it's not what you intended, but they will. Let's say you offhandedly were like, oh yeah, okay, here's this thing up north, here's the thing to the west, here's the thing to the east. Oh yeah, and there's this blue dragon down in the desert in the south, and PCs are like, blue dragon, that's treasure, let's go kill it. And you're like, oh my god, I didn't even prep for this. Seriously? You start rolling your eyes like, oh man, it's the, what's the name of the NPC? And you're just like, really you're gonna add, I don't have a name yet. Player character players easily do that a lot. So we are headed. We're going to definitely talk. Please save your brilliance for tomorrow, because we're definitely going to talk about this. This really should have been World Building Wednesday, but whatever. I don't care. It's what you guys like to talk about. But to talk about the game I'm working on a little bit, since I did say that we would be talking about this, Retcon the RPG is a tachyonic espionage game that I'm working on. And one of the elements of the game, there's a lot of meta in it that I'm going to incorporate as in-world gaming potential. And one of them that I'm working on is, strangely enough, a player character railroading capability, where a player character can describe an action in the future. Thank you, Rickard. Rickard's like, retcon the RPG sounds like a movement to change the RPG industry. Fist in the air, Sharpie posters everywhere, T-shirts made up. marching in front of like the RPG industry. We'll be sending out memes of people just marching because I don't know where the addresses are at. And just like change the industry. No, but in all honesty, there's going to be a way for player characters to predict the future. Uh, XP for all. What do you want, dice? When do you want it now? Oh shit. Sorry. Making fun of protestings. I shouldn't be doing that because they're no more TPK. No more. Terrible, terrible. You guys are so bad. But so there's a way for player characters to describe an action that is supposed to happen in the future. And then yeah, hashtag sorry, not sorry. And so the player characters can get a bonus if they railroad themselves to enact the action that they see in the future because that action is supposed to happen in the future because the timelines say it's supposed to happen. And so I'm working on how not to make this something breakable, but there will be a way for a player character to go, oh yeah, in the future, I don't know, I'm driving a sports car down the road and with my pistol out the window and I'm blowing away the bad guys, and it's like, but you're in an office meeting. How the hell is that supposed to happen? And if the players push themselves to do that, it's almost like a railroading thing because if they get themselves in a situation, they'll get a bonus. Yeah, I think that's going to be a little fun thing in it. There's going to be a lot of like, the game isn't really going to be based around specifically traveling through time. Omen says, well, some protests can be stupid at times. True, that doesn't make them any less fun. But there will be like, it's our world manipulated by fractures in time. So there is going to be a bit of the public knowledge that there are time altered events happening in the world, like waterfalls going backwards, or a small forest where plants keep growing and dying rapidly, or a fountain of youth, protected by the military, that the rich are able to go there and whatnot. And there's going to be fractured bits and pieces, and the players are going to play docs agents, as in Paradox, and the world that they are in is going to be pulled from a lot of tropes we've seen. Like, for example, there's a Netflix show here in the States called Travelers. Individuals sent back in time. It's another movie, Source Code, Travelers, Tenet, things like that. Cameron says, how are the PCs controlling time? Time Watch? The PCs play characters that are victims of Paradox. So they have inside of themselves something intrinsic that allows them to modify time, and in space too, because space has a lot to do with that. So it's not that the player characters will just be time travelers like sliders. It's they're able to manipulate time, making things move fast, slower, go reversing, and in small ways. They increase their speed. They can heal a wound. They will be able to. Someone throws a grenade, and they could pause the grenade from during its half explosion, and maybe somehow pick up that explosion and move it somewhere. There's going to be a lot of that idea. Now, mind you, it won't be all or nothing. So, for example, a car wreck could be turned in reverse, but that flipping car that flows in reverse. Yep, that car going in reverse might be a danger to the people just as much as the car wreck happening itself. So the player characters, because I ripped a lot of this from Tenet, and I like the idea that the player characters might arrive somewhere where something has happened and realize that it's going to happen in reverse because it's already happened, and they have to deal with such a thing. So, and there's going to be I honestly am stealing the flashback from Blades in the Dark, and I'm expanding on that as well. So a player could flashback to something, and there's going to be different types of character, not classes. It's okay. Um, Character classes would represent. They're not going to be classes, but there would be like a spy or an agent or an assassin or a sniper or whatever. There's going to be that, and then there's going to be how has time affected your player character. For example, maybe someone is living out the life you should have had. So yeah, Red Dice says, "Ooh, nice flashbacks are one of my favorite mechanics in the Forged in the Dark games." Yeah, the such a simple mechanic, even though it sounds like it's game breaking. There's another game called Leverage that does the same thing. So player characters walk up to guarded gate. Player character says, I'd like to use a flashback. They use a point in a game. They use stress for the Forge in the Dark games, but you could use something else. In this game, instead of hit points, we have time. I'm not sure if I'm going to call it time. I'm torn between calling it something cutesy like ticks or tocks, countdown, or just call it time. And the idea is a player character could flash back to a point, say 3 days ago, to have a drink with that guard to convince them to let them pass into the guarded location. They succeed. Now we flash back to present day. The guard looks at the PCs, nods, touches the desk, and walks away. PCs go to the desk, open up the desk. There's a key in the desk. They get key card to open up the door, right? That's how a flashback works. It's basically a skill check. Now, the failing the skill check on a flashback means that they tried to do the flashback and they make things worse. The guard's like, I knew you guys are going to be here. Hit the alarm, or I knew you guys would be here. It's like, oh no, the guard put extra people on duty. Oh no, there's too many guards on duty. So that's how a flashback works. It can work in your favor or work against you. And strangely enough, it doesn't break the game. What else? There's going to be issues where players are going to want to go back in time to kill the bad guy by killing them as a child or something. There's a meta reason why you can't do perform such an act. It's going to be part of the game, but I think the best part of it will be doing things like having a run and gun battle on a derailing train, but the train starts moving in such slow motion that the player characters are able to run across the skin of the train and up and down the aisles of the train as it starts to crumple and such, as if it's moving in slow motion, or having battles in a collapsing building or during a storm or something where time is not moving. They are agents moving throughout time, but the population may not see it because they're moving in the blink of an eye. But the blink of an eye might take, for the player characters, like 15 minutes and they don't see it or something. So there's going to be quite a bit of that. I'm working on a large list of adversaries in this world. So, for example, there are I'm twisting something on the multiple worlds idea. So the multiple worlds idea is that for every choice made, there's an infinite number of other choices that were not made. Cameron says, there are other supernatural elements going on in the game? Yes. And so the multiple worlds idea is that there's an infinite number of choices. And I'm darkly going the opposite and going, sure, there's an infinite number of choices, but there's a predisposition for an act to happen in one way and not the other. And those nexus of choices tend to more often than not fall into the same thing. You can't go back and essentially, you really can't go back and kill Hitler. I mean, you could, but the same act would happen, right? There's a propensity for things to happen one way more than another. But what the player characters can do is save particular individuals. It's going to be very personal, so they can stop certain individuals or prevent a bomb from going off, or they may have to live through a what's it called? Groundhog Day situation, to get out of it. And so those are going to be some of the adventures that they go on, in terms of supernatural events. All of it related to time and whatnot. Red Dice says, how about some sort of creature that feeds on time alterations? It attacks, appears when someone has been altering time a lot. Oh, hell yeah. Oh yes. Yeah. I'm going to pull quite a bit from mythology to represent things like, for example, something that came to mind is the idea of the multi-armed pantheon from Indian culture, like Kali. But in this world, it's almost as if they are like mutated people slash creatures that have been uh, uh, the wrong confluence of too many timelines put together and such. So there's like multiple arms, but there's like t- I my mind's not allowing me to describe a semi-physical creature or something of that nature. Yep. Oh, Kyle Adam, hey, what's going on here, man? Says, how about calling your flashback meta currency tachyons? You could even make it an in-game resource used by docs agents. Oh, there's already going to be you're already there, sir. Instead of hit points, characters will have a time factor in-game resource that players will expend. So it's not like they are losing hit points to be knocked out and dying, that they have a certain amount of time to finish a mission, and if they run out of time, they fail. And so it's not a matter of it's a measurement of like, oh, let's chase after the bad guy. If you run out of time, the bad guy gets away. It's not that you died in effort, it's that your time ran out. And it might even make time go back and you have to repeat it all over again. And so that's the idea behind that. So yeah, that's exactly it. So yeah. Anyway, guys, we've come to the end. I do have to get out of here. You guys have a great day. Yeah. Oh, nice. I see it. Really keen on the retcon system, man. Yeah. Red Dice says, I like the idea that if a time traveler was destroyed in the past, because they're a time traveler, they still exist, but in a distorted paradox form as an enemy, that'd be cool. Yeah, the player characters specifically are docs agents. They are like, they're paradoxes. And they're going to have anchors to the world, people living out the lives they should have had. There might be elements in the world where, if we can go a little bit dark, they might have lost someone that they might try to bring back from another time period, things like that. So yeah, the what is it? Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse Kingpin thing is going to fit into this as well. So very much so, very much so. We'll talk about this tomorrow. You guys have a great one. I got to get out of here. Got to get to work. You guys have a great one. See you. Bye. Thank you so much.